So this is a continuation of yesterday's video. So if you missed that, just go back and check that out. Basically, that video went through what I do to get my technique back in shape as quickly as possible after a long break. And I don't know when you're watching this, but this is just after the holidays, so that's why I've had a bit of a longer break. So in this one, I'm going to show you what I do to get my pentatonic picking chops back again, because it's really a different feel doing 3-note per string type stuff versus more pentatonic 2-note per string picking stuff specifically. Just because I do one thing well doesn't mean that automatically I do the other thing well. So you can use this one as just a technique builder in general for your pentatonic picking. And I'm taking this sequence from my Pentatonic Picking Power book. So if you like this stuff, definitely check that out. Now that book is obviously way deeper than what this video could ever be. It's 180 pages, and you have a full practice routine to not only regain your chops, but to actually develop them in the first place. But this sequence is from that book, so check that out if you're interested. And whether you get the book or not, just make sure that you try this. And I just wanted to show you exactly how I practice, because I realized that I can say like, well, practice slowly and do this or whatever, but I think it's more helpful if you can actually see me do it. And of course you can fast forward if you want to, but I'm gonna play through these sequences or this sequence exactly as I would practice it normally. So I actually see this as part of my practice now. And I'm gonna use the same tempo and everything, and also a bit drier sound than normal, so you can really get an insight into how I actually practice. So this is the way that I practice technique in general. It doesn't really matter if I want to get my technique back up from a break or not. It's basically how I develop my technique. This way of practicing, focusing on really quick transitions and accuracy and all that stuff that I talked about in the previous video, and then combining that with speed burst practice. But at this point, it wouldn't make sense to do any type of speed burst practice because I really need to get back into the groove of things. So I think this is really important to understand, that the speed burst stuff will only be as effective as, you know, depending on how much time you spent on doing this type of practice. And that's what's worked really well for me. So if you have trouble with the normal starting slow with a metronome and speeding up method, maybe try this for a while and see if it helps you out as well. Again, I'm gonna play through the sequence, and I call this quasi sixes because it's basically this Eric Johnson type sequence. But instead of moving up to the next shape and going down, I'm actually restarting as I get to the top here. So I go up 6 notes, and then I restart here and go back down. And the reason for that is that then I get to experience both ways of changing strings, because when I start down here, I'm gonna lead with a downstroke for each string. So down, 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 down. But from here, it's gonna be upstrokes instead when I change strings. So up, 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 up. And then I turn that around and start on a downstroke here. So I get the downstrokes in the descending way. And then I see the ascending version starting here. And go back up. So that's the whole sequence, and I'm going to apply that to all 5 positions in the A minor pentatonic. And you have this written out in the tabs, which you can access on my Patreon. I have a link in the description. But also, like I said, this full sequence is written out in my Pentatonic Picking Power book as well. So I'm going to start the metronome here. And I like 80 BPMs because that's a good trade-off for me to not, you know, taking forever to play something, but I can also focus on that transition time. And again, I'm not going to go through the transition time explanation. I'm going to link to that as well, but basically it means that I try to do really quick motions between each note. So I really get that legato feel, really connected feel or sound. So I'm going to start in the first position here, or exactly the shape number 5. And I'm not going to cover all the shapes and all that stuff. You have that in the tabs, and it's just the normal pentatonic 2 note per string shapes. But this is the way that I would do it. So I'm going to start here. Really focusing on trying to get everything in time as much as possible. So that was the ascending version. Then I do the descending version right away, and that just means that I start on the top of the shape. So I got a little bit of extra noise here, but that's stuff happens. But in general, what I'm listening for here is that everything is very synchronized and that everything is as perfect as possible. So that's the first position here. And as far as my fingering here, what I'm thinking about is basically keeping one finger per fret. So that's why I don't go try to do this. Instead, I try to keep the thought behind it is, if my fingers were equally developed, what's the most logical fingering? So for most of these shapes, it's going to be very easy to see that. But when we get to the third shape here, I'm going to show you the exception that I use. And then you can try that for yourself. And if you like it, you can keep using it. So that's the first shape. And then I'm going to the second one here. Same thing, starting on the ascending version first, downstrokes. And the focus here is really to try to keep it in time as much as possible, which is trickier than it might sound, because even though it's only 8th notes at 80, to really get the timing right, it takes focus. And obviously me talking at the same time here, so I'm not going to have the exact same focus I would have normally. So you have to overlook any rhythmic inaccuracies here. Alright, so that was the ascending version. Now I'm going to do the same shape again, starting on a downstroke from the top. Really focusing on the relaxation. And quick motions. Alright, next shape. Starting on the top. All right, so now I have the third shape here. And I call this the third shape because it starts on the third note of the pentatonic scale. And this one can be a bit tricky because if I try to keep it one finger per fret, basically that works for the lower 4 strings here. But then I have to shift up, which is not necessarily a big deal, but none of the other shapes really have that problem in it. So it can be quite, can be tricky sometimes to keep your place. So what I've found works better for me is to keep the third finger here on, basically in this position, and in this key is going to be the 12th fret. So if you look at my third finger here, I'm playing every string except the B string. I'm going to use the third finger on the 12th fret. So the third finger kind of helps me to have something to focus on, because I know I don't need to move this finger away from this fret, so it kind of anchors me in the shape. So the only difference here is that I have to stretch out and do this, but it's fine up here because, you know, it's not that far to stretch, and it just feels like a more stable fingering for this pattern. So if you had trouble with this particular pattern, which I've seen a lot of my students tend to fly through most of the other shapes, but this shape, for whatever reason, actually not for whatever reason, for this reason, they tend to stumble a bit. But when we try this, it just feels much easier to do. But for sure, try this version as well, because it's going to depend on the context of whatever you're playing as well. So it's good to be comfortable with both. But for this type of exercise, I definitely use this type of anchoring with the third finger. So here we go. Right, start from the top. All right, next shape. Starting from the top, and when I say top here, I just mean pitch-wise. Obviously, this is closer to the floor, but I always talk in musical terms. So that's why I say from the top. All right, now we're back to where we started, but I see a lot of people make the mistake of thinking like, well, then I'm done because I've done all 5 patterns in this case. But I think that's a big mistake, because then you're missing all the shapes up here. And even though they're the same on paper, they feel different because you have it feels tighter up here because of the tension of the string, but also it kind of looks a bit different as well, because you're not, if you look at this shape compared to this one, your actual viewing angle will be different. So it's a lot of small details like that. Plus the fact that most of the solos you're going to play is probably going to be higher up rather than lower down on the fretboard. So it doesn't make sense to just stop because you've exhausted all the patterns. So again, we restart with this pattern. I'm going to use exactly the same fingering. So here we go. From the top. And then we have the next shape. From the top. So the last shape that I can fit on this guitar is the next one here, and starting from the bottom. And from the top. right, so that's pretty much what it would sound like when I practice by myself. And obviously, when you film yourself like this, you kind of become really hyper aware of everything. So I can actually recommend that. And I'm probably going to do more of this stuff if you like it, because fine for me as well, it's just, you need to focus a bit more and make sure you get everything correct. Because even when you've been playing for a long time as I have, some mistakes can slip through the cracks, or maybe you don't really care that much. Because whatever, and it just sort of disappears. But filming yourself like this can really help you, even if you don't watch the thing back afterwards, just having that almost like someone is watching you practice, right? That can help you with the focus. So try that if you haven't done that before. And another thing you can try, kind of like doing it, I would suggest doing this maybe for a week or so when you practice. Just have a sheet of paper, and then every time you make a mistake, so every time you make an unintended thing happen on your instrument, you just jot that down. So you can use these hash marks like 1, 2, 3, 4, /5, and so on. So you can actually see basically on paper how many mistakes you make through each practice session. And you might be surprised and potentially horrified that you made way more mistakes than you thought. And that's a really good indication that, oh, maybe I should slow this down, or maybe I should practice in shorter sessions or something, whatever you can do to fix it. Or just keep notating every time you make a mistake. Because it really is easy to make a mistake, forget about it, and just move on, and then not realize that you make mistakes all over the place. And I don't want you to feel stressed out when you're practicing, but when you practice, especially any type of repetitive stuff like this, you should really take care of your technique and so the accuracy and relaxation and all that stuff, because that's how you build good habits. So this is not something you should do when you do anything musical, I think. So when you improvising or playing stuff for fun, don't worry about it. Whatever happens, right? But the more diligent you are when you actually practice technique, the better results you will get when you just do your playing. So it's not about becoming a guitar Nazi and like whipping yourself if you make a mistake. It's all about being more aware when you do these type of repetitive exercises, so they will actually help you. Because if you do, sit and do this type of stuff and you just go for it and it's a ton of mistakes, you don't give yourself a chance to actually develop a good technique. So don't do that to yourself. Spend the time wisely instead and focus on the accuracy and the relaxation. And I think you will be very happy with the results. So with that said, if you have any questions, just post them below. Otherwise, see you in the next one.